Hej allihop och varmt välkomna till vårt webbinarium där vi idag har bjudit in Ana Kuštrak Korper. And I don't know if I pronounced that right. But
That's awesome.
Good enough. Och Anna ska prata om How can service design support better innovation? Och det är baserat på Annas forskning och hennes doktorsarbete från Linköpings universitet. Jag heter Erik Widmark och är grundare av Expedition Mondial. Och som företag, vi är en tjänstedesignbyrå och vi strävar hela tiden efter att lära oss lite nytt, så lära oss mer om vår bransch och det vi gör och nya verktyg, nya sätt att jobba på. Så vi arrangerar de här frukostseminarierna för att sprida både vår kunskap men andras kunskap i branschen. Och som del i det har vi också ett tema där vi försöker bjuda in forskare och folk som funderar och tänker och skriver om tjänstedesign som ligger i framkant. Och därav det här webbinariet. So Anna, I did a quick, I know your Swedish is at the preschool level, but
yes.
I did a very nice intro of you. But I'm going to hand it over to you now to present your work.
Yes.
And once again, thank you very much for joining us.
Okay. Thank you, Per, for this, and Erik for this great introduction. I'm very happy to be here today and to share my research with you. This is actually the results of my PhD dissertation, so I will talk a little bit, of course, about the studies that I did and the results that I have from my PhD dissertation, but essentially I will try to make it as accessible as possible, and we'll hopefully have a good discussion afterwards. So just in brief, this is today's agenda. There are a couple of points I will discuss. First, I will talk a little bit about why is this topic even important and what to some extent motivated me to do the research on this topic. And as we were just discussing before starting the presentation, it is so the service design and innovation, this intersection, I think is relevant for both practitioners, but it's also a big topic in research. So it's kind of in early stages still. There are a lot of things that we still don't know. So I think it's a good position to be in. Then I'll talk about what service design brings to innovation. So what is it about service design that it has become an increasingly important factor in innovation work? So both in private and public sector, and both in research and practice. And I'm pretty sure here you'll probably hear some of the things that are familiar to you. So I will not dig too deeper into that, but I will try to focus more extensively on then how can service design support better innovation. So I will dig a bit deeper into my research studies and some of the main findings, trying to explain how service design can really support better innovation and what it better means here. And based on some of the insights from my research is that it's better innovation is type of innovation that's both sustained and meaningful. So sustained in a way that organizations can proactively engage with innovation in terms of, processes that keep them alert to different kinds of opportunities and threats that are happening on the market or in their environment, and that they can both adapt to those situations, but also act in transformative ways. So sometimes, organizations might want to adapt to some kind of extreme situations or new technologies or something, but this sustained innovation also means that they're able to kind of read the signals from the market and actually be the ones leading the transformation. And meaningful innovation, it's more in terms of the value that innovation creates for different types of actors. And I think you'll probably see the entry point for design here. I will finish with some of the key takeaways, and I will just mention briefly resources and tips and some of the literature that I will leave in this presentation, so you will get it after the webinar so that you can see some of the works, both academic and more practice-oriented, that I've been basing my research on. Okay, so why service design and innovation? And my motivation, both personal and research-driven, was kind of problematizing this assumption that innovation is dominantly connected to technology, and that it happens as this kind of stroke of genius among this very highly researchy R&D environments. And the truth is that innovation is very often a very messy process. So this kind of stroke of genius where someone comes with this grand idea and this change happens kind of out of nowhere is not really how things work. Usually it's not how things work. Even if you have some examples, more historical examples, how some inventions were created by accident sometimes. Still, if you dig a little bit deeper, there's this understanding or there's this insight that any kind of new knowledge is actually always created based on some knowledge that existed before, or some of the more collaborative ways where discussions sparked some ways of thinking or different kinds of mental models that led you a certain way. So as already said, innovation, when you really do the innovation work, you really feel it's a very messy process. And the intention to innovate does not always mean that innovation will happen. So there's a difference between invention and innovation. And this is, even in innovation theory, this is a significant difference, right? Invention is this, grand idea that's often materialized in some kind of a product or a technology. But it doesn't necessarily mean that by the invention you can claim innovation, right? Innovation is something that it implies that it needs to be implemented or accepted. In other words, it needs to create value for one of the focal actors. For example, it needs to create value, some kind of value for the organizations, usually for the user. And when I talk about value, I don't necessarily mean financial value. So the new value is often related or connected to a new experience that is tied into a good business model. So it's very difficult sometimes to pinpoint what's the source of innovation. So is it the new technology, or is it the new business model, or is it just the right time of the market where users have matured enough to be able to accept a new technology? Is it more like a systemic thing, like some infrastructure? It's actually the interplay of all these things. And one way how organizations can be, to some extent, how they can innovate in a sustained way is to be aware of all these different, let's say, building blocks of innovation. And I think, for example, Uber is a good example of this type of innovation. They did not really invent any new technology. Of course, they did make some different ways how this technology can be used, but they made technology more meaningful and user-friendly. So this was the primary way, together with their business model, how they reinvented the market and how they actually, by using the resources that already existed to more or less extent, have created an innovation. Another aspect is changing landscapes. So in changing landscapes, what I've seen a lot and what research has been talking about a lot is this difference between products and services that is disappearing. So it's very difficult to talk about products and services today as something completely separate, because any service is usually technology-based and any product also implies some kind of service sync. So as these boundaries are becoming very blurred and this very clear difference is disappearing, it creates a lot of challenges for many organizations, especially the ones that are technology focused, so that are accustomed to produce technology or products that are in a very I would say technology-oriented way. So with big R&D departments, et cetera, et cetera. So these types of organizations are realizing that integrating service into their offering is necessary. So what's happening actually on the market is that they're transitioning to become a service company, and this servitization and service transitions are happening, especially in big organizations, but also if you think about smaller types of organizations like startups, they're also thinking about their products often as service solutions. So this also metaphor of everything as a service is something that's constantly, I would say, accompanying this organizations who are integrating technology with services and trying to introduce design into the whole story. So what this complexity of today's innovation has created in many organizations actually summarized in this quote, and this quote is from one of the informants from one of my research projects, who says there is a common problem with many companies because they develop technology and say, okay, now I've developed technology and I'm going to go and sell it. And then they come back and say, but no one needs it. To be honest, I'm often surprised how organizations think that they are user-centered or that they are very customer-oriented. Well, they're actually not. And many times, regardless of their marketing, sales, or client support systems, they have very hard time articulating and integrating knowledge about the users or their clients, or understanding what is the value of their solution to the user. So I think this connection to the value and how value is created in a co-creative manner, and what actually users need, what their clients need, there is often a misalignment there. And for me, personally, this was an entry point of service design. So how can service design support innovation that is value-based and that can really help you through different tools and methods and processes, how it can help organizations to articulate these things that, and this knowledge that many people in the organizations have, but they somehow need to come together to be able to pinpoint different building blocks necessary for the innovation work. Okay, let's move to what service design then brings to innovation. And I'm sure many of these things are familiar to you. So oftentimes, when you do research on service design, you get asked what is the definition of service design, because I think for people who maybe do not have formal education in design or who don't have any experience working with design, they think of design as an outcome, right? And design is really a process, it's a practice. So service design, I define it also in my dissertation as an innovation approach that integrates design creative practices with a service perspective. And when I talk about design creative practices, it's about collaborative ways of working. It's about understanding users as experts of their own experience, right? Giving them some kind of agency and proactivity in the ways they decide about future services or future scenarios or anything related to the changed ways of working or doing. It also has a strong practices in visualizing all the intangible elements of the service, so different touch points, different parts of the user journey that are often assumed, but once you visualize them, you are able to actually say or reflect something about them. And this practice of reflection in action, so not only learning through design, so using design to learn something about the user or about the user needs or about different values that different stakeholders have, but also somehow learn about what this knowledge means in the context of a bigger service system or in the context of some kind of ideal future scenario that you want to achieve. And when we talk about the service perspective, or when I define it as, design creative practices with a service perspective, here I mean that the multi-actor and systemic perspective that is so, I would say, inherent to how services are today thought of. Because this multi-actor perspective and systemic perspective and the whole service thinking and the service logic is actually essentially focused on how value is co-created. And value is seen as a concept that is actually interactive, right? When we talk about value co-creation in research, we think about, or we would define it as a type of interactive value formation, where you don't assume that an organization or a company comes and then delivers value to the user, because then you put actually the user or your client in a very passive role. But you need to understand that it's kind of a two-way process. And I think this kind of conceptualization of value creation has become dominant in service research. So understanding that you as an organization can offer value propositions, but it's really depends on the user and how well they understand and make sense of that value proposition, whether they will use a service or an offering or whatever or not. So there's a lot of things to unpack there. And I think service design as an approach has a great potential to do exactly that. So what I've also seen in my research, and what research before mine has confirmed, is that there are different ways or there are different things that service design brings to innovation. First of all, and I think most of you have experienced this, is this structured frameworks of action. So through methods and different frameworks and tools that really enable people to engage in different co-creative or co-design activities, to think about their own experiences, to be able to articulate them and visualize them. And this serves as a great way to gather insights about a certain problem and redefine the problem to actually have a solution that's meaningful. Then the second thing is this participation, co-design, co-creation. So more in terms of ways of including people in the innovation process. So both internally and externally. So you can include the users or the clients in different kinds of co-design workshops, or if you work as a service designer in a company, you can also, there are different ways how you can talk or include other team members, when you work on projects creating certain solutions. A lot of, I would say, service design impact has been addressing the fuzzy front end of the innovation. As you've probably heard many times, that service design is capable of dealing with this wicked, ambiguous, and complex problems, which is usually what defines the beginning of any innovation process. So it's kind of fuzzy at the front end of the innovation, and service design can really bring some, I would say, structure to the fuzzy front end, not necessarily because it has all the frameworks and tools, but because the way you work with service design is embracing this ambiguity. I think service designers, and probably you will also be aware of that from your own experience, are very, I would say are very comfortable with not knowing things or redefining things in the beginning. Even if you have a client who comes and say, okay, we want to create an app for something. So maybe through the research process, especially in the beginning, you reformulate an app as a solution, or you bring insights that actually, redirects the whole design process in another way. Whether this is accepted or not by the client is another part of the story, but let's say that there's a lot of power, I think, of service design, especially in the beginning at the fuzzy front end of the innovation. Also, it brings this very human-centered and systemic lens. So seeing the big picture and trying to figure out how all these things are connected in a more systemic ways is also what different service design methods and tools actually enable projects to work with. So I think these kind of 4 things are main when we talk about what service design actually brings to innovation. However, I think, and this is what I've also seen in my research, and some of my research questions have been led with this in mind, is some of the challenges that service design also faces. Sometimes the expectations of service design in general and service designers is that they're like wizards who will come with their magic wands and fix everything in one go. But usually it's very difficult to move beyond inspirational one-off projects and actually do the implementation, reach the implementation of changed service systems or practices. Sorry, I'll just have a bit of water. So even if you work on projects in workshops that aim to discover something, trying to go beyond that, so beyond inspiring people who have never encountered maybe these ways of working, is very difficult in a way that, so implementation is challenging, and creating actually learning out of the experience in terms of a more long-term outcomes is also difficult. So this kind of capability development and learning that's being integrated in organizations in a way that organizations can support service design work in innovation projects on a long term is also challenging. This requires a lot of organizational alignment and mindset change. And these things then put you in the loop of another very messy, I would say, process. And it's very dependent on how organizations deal with their own structure and culture. So there are a lot of things that can happen with it, with this embeddedness actually of service design. Sorry. So how can service design actually support better innovation? And what I've seen in my research is that there are usually three levels where service design aims to create some kind of impact in terms of innovation. One is through methods, tools, and processes. So using tools, methods, and processes to create new ways of working. Then another level is through principles and strategies. So trying to embed certain principles like human-centeredness, systemic perspective, taking into consideration the fact that value is interactive, taking into considerations that different stakeholders might have different types of value that they want to achieve, and translating this into some kind of strategy that might result in a different business model. And then finally, on a more higher level is the organizational culture and structure. So in the studies that I did, both studies were in technology context. So one was with technology startups, the other one was with big established companies that were very innovative and had the, I would say, tradition of working with technology development. So these were the levels that we saw that service design had or aimed to have an impact on when we come to innovation. So what did I discover in my own research work? Through those studies, I've actually articulated two roles that service design plays in innovation, and I will explain them in more detail and tell you a little bit more about the studies that contributed to these results, but they are creative exploration and ongoing transformation. So what I would like to also say is that this categorization does not mean that the two are mutually exclusive. They differ in the way how organizations integrate and embed service design in their innovation processes and outcomes, but they also actually differ in outcomes that organizations can expect based on how they use service design. So I will talk first about creative exploration. And creative exploration is a role actually that service design has in innovation that's focused very much on designing for new value co-creation, designing for new value propositions. So usually the focus is more on change in a value proposition in a certain product or service or a solution. It's focused on the process and experimentation. So creating a new service concept by using different methods and tools. And it kind of fits within this metaphor of thinking outside the box. What usually this approach to innovation tries to achieve is to kind of get people on board and see the value in experimenting and learning from service design, both, increasing the user focus, understanding the complexities of different values, reinterpreting technology from the more value and use perspective, so just exploring in a new way, seeing new possibilities is the main kind of role of this approach. This approach is to some extent limited in capability building and implementation. Sometimes implementation is not even the goal of the creative exploration, and it's difficult to, on a long-term basis, to build capabilities through the creative exploration. And one of the examples I have is from the study that we did with the startups. So I was working with 5 technology startups that were undergoing service design and innovation projects from more like a consultancy-like projects. And they were focused on developing actually new services. So we saw a lot of change in how they developed their value propositions. And here where you see this on this framework, this facilitating innovation through service design, there was a lot of difference from changing focus from technology to value, from product to service systems, from dyadic understanding to multi-actor, et cetera, et cetera. But what we also saw is that they did embed the service design in a different ways. So some of them understood service design more as a toolbox. So just as, selection of different tools that they can use in different ways. But others, and I would say a lesser amount of them, understood it as the application of principles. So how can we be more human-centered? How can we be more systemic in the ways we rethink our technology? So I would say this is a little bit more of a higher level of understanding. We also saw that service design needs to some extent be good with the timing. So if you are working with the startups, it depends in what kind of life cycle stage they are. So if they're very early in the beginning, usually they're too confused with all these new tools and frameworks and methods. They're not so prone on changing. So they're too focused on technology development. If they're too far off, so if they're already launched, if they're trying to scale, then it's the service design is also maybe not the good approach to rethink their current value proposition, because at this stage they're too focused on basically satisfying the funders' needs. So somewhere in the stabilization phase, when they're where they have developed technology but haven't really launched yet, is kind of the optimum time frame to rethink their technology from a more value perspective. We can talk about this later, because I'm seeing I'm already out of the time, but I'll then skip to the ongoing transformation. Ongoing transformation is the second role that I've defined for my dissertation. And the ongoing transformation is more focused actually on how do you build long-term service design capabilities in organizations. So it's actually the goal is designing for organizational transformations, to support these different types of service transitions that organizations are going through. It's focused on sustained ways of innovating, and it's actually about these different adaptive practices and collaborative learning. So how can we build capabilities? How can we focus on learning to and through design? And oftentimes the main challenge is that it's influenced by the organizational structure, and it's very much resource intensive. So if you don't have the support from the top management level, the ongoing transformation usually is very, very difficult to achieve. And the example is from my second study that I did, where we focused on how can service design support the dynamic capabilities building. And dynamic capabilities is one, let's say, theoretical framework from the organizational studies and theories there, which actually talks about how organizations go through sensing, seizing, and transforming, how they build these capabilities to be able to achieve competitive advantage. So sensing opportunities and threats on the market in order to seize business opportunities through redefining their business models, and then constantly kind of being aware and transforming their resource base to be able to adapt and transform their business environment. So what we found in this study is that service design, there are different service design practices that can contribute to both sensing, seizing, and transforming capability building. Of course, the most, I would say, prominent one is the sensing capability, where service design contributes, because it's a lot focused on sensing opportunities and threats. So it's very focused on the research part. And here, some of the practices is articulating, framing, and anticipating problem spaces. So how do you actually redefine different problems that you have? How do you articulate them? How do you frame them? In seizing capability, which is more focused on how do you seize the business model, how do you seize the business response actually when you detect a certain opportunity or threat on the market? This is related to generating, embedding, and infrastructuring strategic response. And it actually means that service designers should be set or should have a seat at the table where strategies and business models are discussed, because they're bringing actually knowledge about the market opportunities and threats that is somehow integrated from different system levels. And finally, the transforming capability and which service design practices contribute here is actually articulating and co-creating organizational cultures and mindsets. And service design has a more, I would say, leadership role in this transforming capability. Yeah, I think we can discuss this in a little bit more detail. I would like to maybe mention some of the key takeaways from this talk. So in my own research, I have articulated these two roles of service design and how it contributes to innovation, to better innovations. One is creative exploration and ongoing transformation. In creative exploration, the focus is more on experimenting with the method in order to get people on board, to try and learn by doing. And in ongoing transformation is more about the question on how you actually make sure that service design capabilities that you build or that you want to teach remain actually present in the organization and can help organizations redefine their innovation processes and the way the innovation is structured along the different levels in the organizations. So it's about meaningful and sustained innovation that is focused on value. And I will finish with, I would say, 3 different quotes also from some of my informants in the studies. I would say the most important thing is the fact that you learn the exploratory way. So I think one of the key takeaways is really thinking about how you embed tools, processes, and principles to uncover the innovation potential. And I think if you're in consultancy work, you see that a lot on the everyday basis. The second one is you need to see the big picture. This is a little bit more challenging because it requires people to kind of get on board and understand that, you know, their own assumptions are just assumptions, and some other people within the company or some other users or actors in the service system might have, you know, different assumptions about what better is. So this aligning resources and strategies to ensure implementation is very, very important to achieve. And I like this one. It was clear we needed to evangelize. It actually tells you something about how disseminating service design practices to transform the organizational mindset should work. And these three things are connected. So the more people you get on board in trying out new things, in understanding the value of service design for, you know, getting really, really valuable insights about different system actors, about different processes, redefining the problems, it's a way to kind of evangelize the organization about the importance and the value of service design. And this is happening more and more. In the second study, I've talked to different service design experts in different organizations who have seen the change, let's say in the past 5 years, in the way service designers were treated on a more organizational level. So having a seat at a table, being able to actually do the work that maybe doesn't always feel too comfortable, but in the end produces a more, I would say, valuable and meaningful innovation solutions. I will finish off with this. You will get this presentation later, but I'll just briefly mention the following. So I've listed a couple of things here. You will find my contact. So if you want to keep in touch, there are ways and places how you can do that. I've also left some of the information about the research projects that I'm currently developing. So if you want to collaborate, we're always looking for partners for potential projects or fundings or design experts as kind of data entry points. I've also listed a couple of ways how we can collaborate with LEU. So we have a design master program, and then we have master thesis and service design studio course that are actually coming up now in spring, where students usually work with external challenge owners. So if you think you have a challenge for students that you know they can work on, this is a way to do it. We're also at LEU preparing one of the biggest Nordic design research conferences called Nordes. So it's next year in June, and currently submissions are opened for different types of papers and workshops. So please check the website if you're interested in submitting. And of course, if you want to support the conference through sponsorships to increase your visibility in the community, this is also an option. And finally, the reading list. I've put basically the list of some of the academic resources, but also like useful and popular books that I think might be interesting to you, and some of the literature with the concepts that I've used here that you might also have a use of. So thank you. I'll stop sharing the screen and maybe we can switch to the questions.
Thank you so much, Ana. Great presentation and very informative, I think, and it raised a lot of thoughts. We have a couple of questions. I have loads of questions.
Okay.
But I'm going to start here with Nico. He asked, what's the difference between service design and service innovation? Is there a simple answer?
Yeah, it's not really a simple answer. I would say that service design, I define service design as an approach to service innovation. And then service innovation, I would say depends on who you ask, but it's more like it's a concept that actually talks about what is new, to whom is it new, and how something is new. So it's more focused on what do you create. So what is new and who benefits from the newness, and then service design is more about how do you reach that. So it's more process focused, I would say.
Okay.
Short. But
Short
if anyone's interested in a long academic discussions, I'm open up for that.
That could be
as well.
a PhD in itself, I guess.
Yeah, it could, definitely.
But I think what, at least for me, what you did was you pinpointed that there are different situations or different roles or maybe different values of service design and a service designer. but we're still talking about service design and service designer. But would you like to elaborate a little bit about, are there different service designers, or could one service designer do all of this that you're talking about, both exploratory and ongoing transformation? And
yeah,
are we geniuses, or should we just focus on certain things?
I think, and I think we also had a discussion on that. I think it really depends on a personal preference. The way I actually try to use service designers here is more like a common noun, reflecting anyone who, to some extent, does work related, any kind of design related work, right? And I think we know there are a lot of different ways how you can do it. So, for example, in the studies that I did, especially with the large organizations, there was service designers of different profiles, right? Some had formal design education, some came from more engineering background, some came from a more science background. So their formal education differed, but what kind of joined them together and why we define them as expert designers is because they had 6+ years of working constantly using service design methods, going on some kind of education, et cetera, et cetera. So I think in this sense, industry is still finding its way. There are a lot of, for example, graphic or industrial designers that kind of transferred more into the service design. There are people from business and marketing who are transferring to service design. And I think this currently, this multiplicity of perspective is actually good. But if you're aiming for either creative exploration or ongoing transformation, it's not so much about having one single service designer do all the work, but it's really about understanding the organization or the context where you're at. And there's an interesting concept of design legacies, which I've left in the presentation on the last slide on the literature, by this brilliant researcher who is actually saying that it might not be the best idea to think from the perspective, oh, I'm a service designer and I'm going to go to the organization and embed all these things so that we can, innovate. It's really about understanding how any organization designs, because she argues that design is an essential part of any organization, even if organization is not aware that they're designing. So maybe you've heard about silent design, right? It's every organization design. The same way as, you would hear people saying, oh, we don't have marketing, but you do. By the fact that you're actually selling something, you do have marketing. Maybe you don't have promotion, but that's another question. So understanding where you're at and what kind of organization you are trying to bring these tools into, I think is very helpful in setting up the expectations. Because I think it also then depends on what you end up doing and achieving, right? It takes a little bit. I know it's difficult, and at least with a lot of service designers that I've talked to, usually they would say, oh, we never go for the best solution. We always need to compromise, right? But it's just the reality of their work currently, but maybe it will remain the reality of the work. I don't know.
We have another definition question here from Ana. In what way do you define the term design thinking in relation to service design?
Yeah, that's another great question.
Yes.
Especially in terms of
$1 million question.
Yeah, because just to give you a little bit of the context, I think in research, these two terms are very much still far apart. So people would either interchangeably use the two, or they would pretend that, these communities are completely separate. I use service design. The way I use service design is more related to how I understand service. And I understand service more from the service logic perspective that everything really is about servicing. So it's kind of the process. So any kind of design practice, including design thinking, let's say, is part of the ways to reach this service perspective. I think also design thinking is often connected to the business practice, although, so if you go more into the business practice and into the business journal, then it's a concept where everyone can design, and maybe, you know, the lay people can learn how to use design tools to be more creative. If you go into the design community, then design thinking means something completely else. I think the connection between service design and design thinking is that you would commonly see Double Diamond as kind of a framework where service design uses, design thinking uses. But so in some ways it can mean the same, but I think what differs service design is this perspective on service, so that it's very systemic, that it's multi-actor, and that it's really focused on this interactive forms of value creation. It's a bit of I think a conceptual thinking, but there are a couple of resources at the end of the presentation which will hopefully help clear these things out.
Thank you. And our friend Fotta Forsberg, great presentation, Anna. What competence profile do you think is normal for service designer? Would it be a broad one or a more T-shaped with broad plus some special area?
I think a T-shape is what I commonly saw at least in my studies. Competences was not something that I was focused on, but of course I have some data on that. So T-shaped, I think, is a type of a competence that is the reality, because if you work in consultancy, then you work across different industries. And then for every client, you need to figure out the industry, the product, the technology, the competitors, and it requires you to constantly learn about you know, the context that you are trying to make change in. Even if you work as a service designer in an organization that's part of like a unique context, like, I don't know, an automotive industry, there's still, I think it still requires this T thinking, because although you're kind of maybe more exposed to, or you're more used to the context and you've learned more about the certain technology, it's still, I would say you're still in a context which is probably more engineering oriented, or where you're more lonely than not. So yeah, I think that the T competence is the reality, just because service design work requires a lot of different things.
And would there be, do you have examples of different parts of this T? Like, I guess the broad one would be overall knowledge of the design methodology and whatever. But what would be the different possible...
I think the overall knowledge and experience of different methods and tools. I think one common one that I've seen, especially with people who do have formal knowledge in design, is the visualization. So they're usually better and more comfortable in visualizing things or expressing themselves in a visual manner, which is extremely important for getting people on board, especially in the early stages of research. So the fact that they can distill information in a visual form and do it very efficiently is something that I would say they keep seeing as super valuable. Then another aspect, I think, is just being aware of the business environment and some of the common business terminology, especially if you're working as a designer on a more mid or higher managerial level, which was the case in some of the companies that I've had in my case studies. So knowing kind of the lingo and how the organization works in terms of strategies and business models and more the strategic processes is very important. And I think, you know, people's skills are very, very important. You know, figuring out how do you communicate with people that are not part of the community of your practice, right? And how do you actually, to some extent, fight for the position and for somehow fight for your own position and convince people that the work that you do is actually valuable, right?
And then that brings us over to Oscar's question here. what do you think, or what's your take on the interplay between service design and business design? And I think what's interesting is that we've started with service design, but
yeah,
it has kind of grown into organizational design, systemic design, business design. So it's like an organism growing. But
yeah.
What is service design then and business design?
Again, it's a good question, which I don't really have an answer to. I think it kind of depends on where do you stand as a professional. I think a lot of things that I've talked to, you can also think of as organizational design or business design or strategic design. At least in research, I don't know how it is in practice that much, but in research, it really depends to which kind of community you are, which community you're addressing. As my research was mostly based, so the starting point was service research, and service innovation in that sense does not necessarily involve just producing a service as an outcome of a certain innovation process, but also changing the processes and the service system along the way, which I think in that sense would be more related to the organizational design. I would say it combines both. But I think from the practitioner perspective, it's all design, right? What's the quote from Herbert Simon, that it's about changing the existing situation into the preferred ones. So again, if you think just as some kind of a design as a process of this changing things into preferred ones, I think it's not so important on which level you are. It's just understanding what these levels kind of enable you to achieve. But I guess if you want to sell it as something, then it does matter to what kind of community you are addressing. So
I know you've worked more, I guess, more with the private sector in your studies, but we have a question about if you know or have read or see any differences between the private and the public sector.
Yeah, I haven't done studies with the public sector. Within the private sector, that the case studies that I had, some of them were developing projects for public sector, especially for healthcare. And I think the challenge there, and often the frustration from service designers who were, I don't know, working as in companies that were developing software or some kind of, product service solution for the healthcare, is actually on the policy level. So how do you change policy? What kind of data you can share? How can you, even if you do the user research study where you detect that, implementing iPads into the hospital wards is completely unnecessary because doctors really are super happy with their whiteboard and writing. But you got funded by the third actor to implement the technology because it's technology. They encounter a lot of frustration there. And there is no easy answer to how they address these questions. Usually they need to compromise a lot. Usually it depends on how organizations they work in is flexible in terms of communicating. And sometimes what they encounter is a lot of, I would say, gatekeeping between people who are in the procurement and who are directly involved with sales of the technology, and then designers and users are very far apart. So I think the structure of how project management actually works in this situation is not really beneficial for service designers or for the service design work that they do. On the other hand, in some organizations that worked a lot with public sector organizations through for example, EU projects, they said that it was better in terms of there was less pressure to somehow stay on the track. So they felt more flexibility and freedom to explore and to really end up with the solutions that are better in the end. So I think public funding to some extent enables you a better flexibility. And it enabled service designers also to have more times, for example, testing or for redefining certain problems or service solutions. So that was, let's say, a positive thing about working with the public sector. But there are a couple of resources at the end, and there are, people from Experio Lab or researchers like my colleague Josina Wink, and who are working a lot with the public sector organizations on these topics.
And we have a question, and I guess in your reading list later on, we'll find the answer, but a suggestion for tools and frameworks for visualizing service design or the service design work. Do you have any quick questions or answers?
No, there is a book called Convivial Toolbox for Generative Research Methods, which I think is very good, and our students use it for their co-design courses and for other different courses. So I think it's a good, I would say, book with lots of different tools that you can use for different kinds of, collaborative ways of working, visualizing, etc., etc. So yeah, that's in the reading list. But I think there are also a lot of websites nowadays that have summarized different types of tools like journeys, maps, and to what purpose you can use them.
I think Service Design Toolbox. .com or something. You can find. We have a question from Fabian here. Why do you think that the epithet, like the label designer, is added to more and more different roles within development? So I guess you have a business designer or a systemic designer or organizational designer.
I think it's a buzzword, right? It sells, and I think it's part of a lot of people jumping on the design train. So it sounds very sexy to have like a design role in the organization. So I think that's mainly the reason. I don't know, but I've also, like from the organizations that I had in the second study, I think out of, let's say, 20 something people, I think only 4 had the formal design in their role. They were, business developers or, something on the line. But probably increasingly it's become very, it's a buzzword. So I think it's a way of organizations to kind of position themselves as innovative as well. Which I think is okay. Any kind of awareness or any kind of language change actually probably induces some kind of mindset change as well. I'm not saying that it will happen if you have a design role, but it makes people become more aware. Oh, okay, this person is in the development team as a designer, and they're also important. So I think it serves some purpose.
Thank you, Anna. We're about to wrap up. I was about to ask a last question, but I'll actually skip it. But thank you so much for sharing your knowledge. And I think for many that has been very insightful and inspiring. And at least for me, you've given me kind of a framework. I talk about service design, but yeah, I can put it into different sorting boxes. Say, okay, this is this type of design I'm working on at the moment. I'm going to switch to Swedish now.
Yeah, sure.
Så, tack Anna och tack alla som lyssnade och ställde smarta, kloka frågor idag. Vi kommer arrangera fler webbinarier och vi kommer arrangera en liten frukost, tänker vi också, i mitten på januari. Så vi kommer att komma med mer information till er som är intresserade av det. Och nästa webbinarie kommer också hända 2023. Då vi kommer bjuda in Systembolaget som kommer dela med sig av sina erfarenheter av att jobba med service design. So thank you, Anna, so much for this. And thank you everyone for listening in today. And we will send out the presentation. And once again, if you have any further questions or if you want to collaborate with Anna and all the brilliant people at Linköping University, you're more than welcome to contact her. And also, of course, if you need service design help as a consultant, I'm more than happy to help you out. So please just get in contact with me or my colleagues. So thank you, everyone, and have a happy Wednesday.
Yeah. Tack.
Bye-bye. Tack.